Kia ora and welcome to the Marlborough Book Festival podcast, the place where you can hear writers talk about their work, their lives and the inspiration behind their writing. I'm Claudia, the treasurer on the committee, and today I'm delighted to be introducing the wonderful Sharon Murdoch, speaking to Nikki MacDonald. Sharon Murdoch started cartooning in her 50s and in a few short years became the first woman to regularly draw political cartoons for a daily newspaper in New Zealand. She discusses her life, her award-winning work, and her drive to draw attention to social justice and the joy of drawing cats and dogs. Please enjoy Sharon Murdoch speaking to Nikki MacDonald.
I'm Nikki MacDonald and I'm going to be your host today. I'm very lucky to be in conversation with Sharon Murdoch. There will be about 10 minutes of questions at the end, so do get your thinking caps on. I'm sure there's plenty of things that you would love to ask Sharon. Unfortunately, Sharon's books are so popular that they are not currently available, but she did do some gorgeous illustrations for How to Walk a Dog, so you can see her work and in that book. A big thank you to our sponsor for this morning's session. If you're game enough to be drinking at 9:30 on a Sunday morning, good on you. So a big thank you to Dog Point, who are sponsoring this session. Now, Stuff cartoonist Sharon Murdoch is New Zealand's first regular political cartoonist. She came to cartooning late, but quickly made up for lost time, winning Cartoonist of the Year in 2016, 2017 and 2018. The first year she was a finalist, she was so sure she wasn't going to win that she didn't turn up to the awards. We had to bring her after she actually got the award, and she came running down. I think you were at the library cafe, weren't you?
No, I think I was having toasted sandwiches at home.
Anyway, the world clearly has woken up to Sharon's talent, so it's fantastic to have her here. Sharon also created the popular Monroe cartoon, illustrated, as I say, How to Walk a Dog, and has published 2 collections of her cartoons. Please join me in welcoming Sharon Murdoch. Now, we are incredibly lucky to have Sharon here today because while we've probably all had a bit of a weird year, Sharon's has been absolutely horrific. And so we're just going to start by Sharon's just going to talk a little bit about the year that's been.
Well, hello, and I'm going to read this for reasons that will become obvious as it goes on. But, and Nikki did warn me not to talk for more than 2 minutes, but I'm quite fond of long-winded stories, so... But this one involves a book and a brain and a birthday. So, in Robert Say's 2014 memoir of a heart attack, the ambulance officer asks him, "Have you had a good day?" He says, "Nobody, by the way, during this not so much interminable as boundless night asks if I've had a good weekend, let alone a good life." In February, I had a brain aneurysm repaired, or more particularly shored up so it wouldn't rupture. The last thing I remember the anaesthetist saying to me was, "What do you do for a living?" "I'm a cartoonist," I said, feeling that this was an unlikely answer. When I surfaced from that thick drug-induced sleep in the neurology intensive care, anchored by tubes and bags, a man was standing beside my bed. He was wearing his underpants over his thermals, and he was bare-chested, staring at me like he was trying to understand what I was. I was telling someone about this last night, and they thought I had imagined him, but I hadn't. He was there. I had gone to sleep in one world and woken up in quite another. The surgeons had told my husband and my daughter that it had gone well, but But they didn't realise that a blood clot had lodged in my brain, and by the next morning it was evident that I had suffered a stroke. In the days that followed, bruises spread all over my body. I needed help to walk. I mangled words. I was hot all the time, and then I was cold. That's like your autonomic nervous system controls all that stuff. So it goes to pot. This is very common, and I know that there are people here who will have suffered strokes. So my heart is with you. I had lost part of my peripheral vision. I missed things. Toilet paper missed the bowl. Cups missed the table. I couldn't reach my head when I showered. Dressing required a lie down afterwards. I held my drooping eyebrow up with white tape, and I cried for short overcut minutes, and then hiccuped ridiculously. In the afternoons, I'd spent my time picking up dry macaroni with blue plastic tweezers and clipping clothes pegs around the rim. Hello. Around the rim of a plastic container. This is a few days after, and I do the crossword every morning. So I had attempted to do it, and I couldn't. Then I had moved. They moved me out of intensive care, and I moved into a room of my own. Well, actually, a room with a roommate. The neurology ward is quite a strange place because brain tumours especially make people do quite strange things, and so the man who was standing by my bed when I woke up, he had all of a sudden, he had a brain tumour, and he wandered around like that and only looked to his left. And they had someone who travelled with them, so they would move him on from places. But then I got a roommate. First there was a woman who arrived at midnight with assorted bags. She wanted a cup of tea, a different nightgown, a shower, the tinny sound of a transistor radio. The second night at 10 o'clock, she saw a girl climbing over our 7th floor window, said a nurse was coming around with a whistle, accused another of letting in thieves and murderers. At 11:30 they moved her to a bed near the nurse's station. At midnight they wheeled in a man. He made lewd jokes to the nurses, and after they left said, "Bitch," and he played Candy Crush and the sound of tinkling gems. At 2 he started masturbating, and I limped around to the nurse's station and asked for a cup of Milo. The nurse had a brain made out of flowers tattooed on her ankle. When I had returned, he had finished and gone back to playing Candy Crush, and I tried to read a crime novel by Denzel Mayrick that I had bought along with the London Review of Books for what was supposed to be a one night in hospital, but I couldn't make sense of the words. As dawn came, I sat on the edge of my bed, watching the light edge over Newtown. John Street intersection at street level is tawdry and tired, but from the 7th floor it was radiant and sun slanting between long shadows. On the 7th day, I went outside. The Wellington wind, that almost constant companion on walks, is irritating, and some days it is hard to think straight. But this wind, the wind of 7 days, sealed in the hospital, was tender. It gently puffed on my skin, and I stood in my pyjamas, eyes closed, holding on to a planter, and then I lurched back inside. And when I went home, I was supposed to go home and then go into rehab at Kenepuru. But then I decided I didn't want to go. So I set up my own little program of improvement at home. At first, when I went home, I was largely silent. I had aphasia. Yeah, that's an inability or an impaired ability to understand or produce speech as a result of brain damage. When I was rung about just to remind me that I accepted this thing to do at the book festival, and I told the woman on the phone that I had had a stroke and I was still going to do it. And she must have been thinking, oh my God. But to learn to write again, I copied the stories of Joy Williams, 99 stories about God. Half a page took me an hour. It was halting and plodding, and one deliberate letter after another. Drawing I put off. I was scared. They say, if anyone here draws, there is quite often, and I imagine it's like it with writing, a fear of starting, and it was especially so. I was really anxious isn't the right word. I was scared that I would not be able to draw and I wouldn't be a cartoonist anymore. So I put it off, and then eventually I set up an easel in the front room, and I began with big drawings, big things like a rhinoceros and an elephant, and worked down to smaller things. Oh, where am I? Oh, this was a drawing I had done about the end of my time in hospital, and I was concentrating very hard. That was the best I could do, and that was why I was scared. Then
were you actually you'd lost feeling and movement in your arm?
Yeah. I think that was my copy of Rembrandt, so I was making progress. Then at about 4 weeks, I got angry at everything. I kicked the dog's bowl across the room, swearing. I threw the keys for the car that I wasn't allowed to drive. I thought tomorrow will be better. But the next day I woke up just as angry, infuriated with my hand, my leg that I would trip over, my forearms that ached at night, the unreliable speech, the hesitations, the run-up to a word that wouldn't come. Thoughts that I just saw the tail of disappearing out the door, leaving me alone, vacant, being reduced to calling the dog the hairy thing. The third day I woke up, and the anger, like an outgoing tide, had left me. Having given up on Denzel Mayrick, I picked up What Days Are For by Robert Desai. In his recounting of his heart attack, he goes on from the question about how his day has been. He says, needless to say, nobody checks to see if I finally read Proust, as I vowed I would before I died. Now, Proust's novel, Remembrance of Things Past, all 12 volumes plus guidebook, was sitting in our front room. Shortly before going into hospital, I had bought the set, 7 volumes and some other editions, published by Chateau and Windus in 1957, with blue and red wrappers and strange illustrations by Philippe Julien. This is one of them. A bit like Cyril and a bit like Edward Gorey, hinting at some levity which I initially didn't find. There were 4 illustrations per volume, which feels a little mean, juxtaposed with so many words. According to Google, there are 1,267,069 words in remembrance of things past. And if you read them at a rate of 300 words per minute, you could reckon on it taking you 45 hours and 27 minutes, providing you don't stop for meals and bathroom breaks. But reading Proust was too hard and would take too much time, the 300 words per minute being purely notional and aspirational and certainly not doable. Of Proust's 3,031 pages, I had read just 30 before giving up. The books were sitting in a stack waiting to be sold. But without the routine of drawing cartoons, time had slowed down. Proust, with his endless probing, his digressions, his sly funniness, his obsessive detailing of everything. Then between volumes I started reading about Proust, Proust's overcoat, about a French perfumer's obsession with collecting Proust's belongings, most particularly his heavy otter fur-lined black coat that he was really without and which he covered himself in bed while writing. A Proust souvenir, a book of the real people on which some of his characters were based, letters to a lady upstairs, a record of his correspondence with a neighbour whom he really met, and Proust and the Squid, about neuroscience and reading. Aunt Leontine in her lime tea and the evocative Madeline in the hawthorn blossom. Memory in time. The feeling of wind puffing on my skin and the way John Street looked in the early morning sun. Proust took me out of myself and he brought me back to myself. So far, I am only up to book 7. And at a rate of 160 words per minute, with stopping for cups of tea and bathroom breaks, it looks like I'll be spending the rest of the year in his company, like a wonderful obsessive friend. And do you know, by chance, it was Proust's birthday on Friday. So happy birthday, Mr. Proust.
Lovely. Thank you so much for sharing that, Sharon. I mean, was there a moment that you realised that it was going to be okay? You know, a drawing moment, I suppose, when you realised actually I can still do this.
I think, excuse me, there are going to be strange pauses through. Probably when I did. When I did my first cartoon for the paper, and I thought I can do it of sorts, you know. Certainly, I think that they have been simpler cartoons since returning to it, but I'm only doing 2 a week at the moment.
I mean, you didn't start cartooning until your 50s, but you obviously came to art a lot earlier, and kind of realised that that was your thing. I mean, what are your earliest memories of drawing?
I remember I had a sleep out in Invercargill and I painted Rivendell above the doorway. And I remember decorating the walls with little paintings and drawings, and I used to, I used to colouring in books, and because I looked at books that had the colour out of red, I don't know if you've seen them, but things where the registration has been out, you know, like you've got the black line and then you've got the colour that moves sideways and leaves the white line. And I really liked that look. So I would colour in all of my colouring in books with this white line and the colour shifted sideways.
Oh, so you were an early abstract kind of. I mean, yeah, so you grew up in Invercargill, which I think you, somewhere along the line, gorgeously described as like Iceland without the epic poems.
Yeah.
I mean, what were your parents arty at all? You know, your father, David, was a carpenter. Marjorie worked in a shop, I think.
I think they both would have been. My father's creativity, I think, came out in his building, you know, like the things he made. And my mother, she was very clever, and she had to leave school because she got a travel sick, and she had to travel 40 miles into Invercargill from Fairfax. And she said that an art teacher had offered her jacked up a job for her at a department store, probably the only department store in Invercargill was H&J Smith's, and as a ticket writer, and which I suspect meant that she did, was quite good at drawing, but she couldn't wait for that, and she took a job at the pie cart that used to be outside, I think it was outside the telephone exchange, and then eventually she got a job in the telephone exchange. But I did see a drawing she did recently, and it really was beautiful.
So, I mean, you ended up studying design, so you went to Wellington Polytech. I mean, did you have any notion at that point of cartooning or illustrating? What did you think at that point that you were going to do with that skill?
I had no inclination to do cartoons. I loved design, and I had this fantasy at 17 when I went to design school that one day I was going to go back to Invercargill in a little sports car with my folio in the back, and that never happened. But
there's still time.
Yeah. But I did love design, so although I did illustration at design school, it was always design first.
I mean, one of the things that you did while you were at design school was, I think in your final year, you did some work for Rape Crisis. Was that, obviously there's a strong social justice theme that runs through your work. I mean, was that your kind of first job in that space, and how did that come about?
Yes, it probably was. I had this tutor called Reg. I remember he had a wart in the back of his head and a parting, and I hated him. And the first day we had him, I think it was like a confrontational. It was our second year, and he was taking us for marketing, and this whole notion was alien. We were just, and he said we should analyse something, like who was buying whatever, and he said, let's take coffee, and then he wrote up, let's put the person who buys coffee, and he put housewife on the board, and I took issue with it and said that it wasn't the housewife. He would be more accurate to say the buyer for the household. And he went on to argue with me about this.
That was unwise.
Yeah. And then forever after, he used to dismiss me at the beginning of the class. Like he would say, of course, Sharon will argue with this, but... And so I was, But anyhow, he did do one good thing. He said to me when we had to do this final sort of thesis of a marketing campaign for whatever, and I think most of the class did socks and cars and motorbikes and things. And he said, well, you do realise you can do one of your social issues. And I had contacted, I think it was Pregnancy Help, because they sounded like they were helping women, and I was going to do a campaign for them. But in fact, they were sponsored by SPUC, and I had to quit that. And I started the thing for the Rape Crisis Centre. But yeah, that was...
So where do you think that, that strong social justice feminist element comes from?
I don't know. In my own family, they were just getting by. So it's funny that although my sister's not involved with, issues, she does work for the newspaper. So we have both found our way into the media and that part of our life. But I don't know where it comes from.
You, at some stage, met cartoonist Trace Hodgson. How did that come about?
My father had just committed suicide, and Jason, I was thinking about you, working with you later. Trace came to work in the newspaper art department where I was, and he was quite early in his career as cartooning. Like he was doing it sort of after hours, and when we eventually started living together, he used to say to me I should try cartooning, that there was no women doing political cartooning, but he was so good, like I don't know how many of you remember Trace Hodgson's work in The Listener, but I was intimidated by him, and I didn't see a way to do it. And at the time I was working, I had a job, I was designer for the City Art Gallery, and then I had gone on to work with a place called the Wellington Media Collective. So the Media Collective was a really good place for me to work. It was a left-wing design group, so it was an easy fit for me,
Did you try any cartooning at that stage? Because you did a collaborative zine, didn't you? A one-off kind of, I think it was called Rabbit, with Trace. So did that involve cartooning, or was it more illustration? Or
I remember when he first brought that zine up, and we were walking home, and he said, if there was two things you wanted to do before you died, what was it going to be? And he said he wanted to pull off a heist on an art gallery.
Not yours.
No. And he wanted to do a zine, it was actually a newspaper. It was a full.
Oh, okay. Rather than, I don't know if people know what a zine is. It's kind of like a low tech.
Yeah. This was fairly high tech.
Was it? Okay, right.
This was offset printed, and it had a big cartoon of his on the front with David Longy in fishnet tights, and I can't remember what else. Probably not much else.
I mean, in 1999, I think you went to South Africa with Volunteer Service Abroad, and while you were there, you actually produced some educational cartoons, I think, about things like AIDS. I mean, gosh, how did that come about, and what was that like? I mean, that must have been an amazing experience.
That was because I had gone to South Africa, and I think it's quite frequently the way VSA had, the organisation that they're working with in the country describes what they want, and VSA finds the person in New Zealand to do it. And they had described what they want, but when I got there, it was, they actually wanted someone who made videos and print, But in fact, we were going out into settlements, and they were quite often didn't have power or running water or anything. But what they were getting was there was this newspaper that went into the township in Dunsane, which was outside East London. In fact, it is a much bigger place than East London, but it was sort of a satellite place that was supposed to supply labour for, or home, like maids and, But it had its own newspaper, Azitu, and then from there it would go into the settlements, and people quite often wallpapered their walls with the pages. And when I was visiting there, I said, well, maybe we could do this comic strip without words, because many of the people who lived in the settlements were illiterate, and so we produced it. I worked with an early childhood education centre, one run by Coastal Women, and so I worked with a local woman, Nalundi, who was really amazing, and we produced this comic strip together of things. The women who ran the centre would write this sort of description of what it was supposed to say or picture, and we would do it.
That must have been an amazing feeling. I don't know, of the power of drawing as a language, without having to.
And the first time that I went out into a village and saw them stuck up on the wall, that was quite neat.
So it was still kind of, I think you started at Wellington Newspaper, it was about 93, and it was, well, pretty much 20 years before you actually got your break cartooning. And I think that was when Tom Scott went, took a breather for 6 months. I guess, how did that happen? Did you just put your hand up and say, pick me, or...
I tried to put my hand up and say, pick me, and I kept doing it. But the deputy editor at the time decided that there were 2 young guys who had won a cartooning competition, so they gave the job to them. But the editor at the Waikato Times said he wasn't taking these cartoons, and asked me if I would do their cartoons, because I had by that stage had started doing Munro. You know that Munro started as just a filler on the page. I was only going to do one, and it was...
So Munro, for those of you who haven't seen it or don't get the Dominion Post, was a little cat cartoon that runs with the crossword. You'll see some examples later on when we talk about cats and dogs. But do you remember what was your first cartoon? Do you remember?
Yes, it was. I think it was a woman who was holding a screaming baby, and it was about spies, and they had a listening device, and they're saying, "I can't hear what she's saying. She must have some kind of scrambling device."
I mean, where do you get your ideas? Because some of them are so conceptual. There's one that we'll come to later that I love, that after Biden was elected and you drew the Statue of Liberty kind of coming to from a coma, saying, how long's it been, or what did I miss? Which is just so kind of brilliant, but so tangential. I mean, how do you come up with something like that?
I don't know. I don't think there is a... Well, it's like you plug in the events, like...
So do you decide a theme? Do you decide what you want to do your cartoon to be about, and then think about ways of representing that?
Yeah, or I listen to the radio quite often, and quite often it'll just be a couple of words that someone says, and that'll flick off a cartoon, and I walk when I'm thinking. But I sometimes think that sometimes I have an original idea, and then it goes one step more, and then I think, and then I realise that the thing that I've ended up with, probably people got no idea what I'm talking about because I know where it started, but they only see where it ended up.
It obviously has been a very male-dominated scene traditionally. I mean, how were you received in the cartooning community when you started as this woman?
Rod Emerson from the Herald got in touch with me after I had done a few, and he was quite supportive. And there's people like Toby Morris, Chris Slane, that they've all been really great. The older cartoonists, probably around my own age and older, they're not so happy.
Less so? Okay.
Malcolm Evans wrote a really... Oh no, though, to be fair, Malcolm Evans attacked everybody.
Don't feel special.
I think that he was writing a blog about how the rest of the cartoonists in New Zealand weren't touching Israel and Palestine. And I have actually tackled that, sometimes coming off not so well. But
yeah, so tell us about public feedback. What kinds of responses do you get from the public? Yes, sorry, we'll go back to the process. Yes,
this is a nice one. I mean, it's quite... I think that this person had written into the paper the day after a cartoon had run on, what was it? Oh, it was Trump. It was Trump. And you know how he was saying fire up people back to their shithole countries that they come from? Well, I had said he was an alien, and I had him in the circular part of the White House being shot into space. And there's a woman in the foreground who's one of the female senators who he was slagging off at the time. And I said, I think it was, yes, we've used cheeseburgers to lure it into the containment module, and now we're sending it back to the shithole galaxy it came from. So I think that somehow the person who wrote this, I suspect they probably like Trump, was not offended by him saying that these people came from shithole countries, but they are really offended by me suggesting that we should send them back to one. Now, this one, I got this last week, and it came in my private messenger.
So how do you deal with that? I mean, do you take it personally? Can you just bat it off? How do you cope with that?
If I'm prepared for them, I don't think too much of it. But at the moment, I'm not really up to it, And so during the last conflict, like the war that was going on and the escalation of Israel and Gaza, I did think of doing a cartoon about it, but I don't think at that stage I could take the flack because
you do get threats sometimes, don't you?
Yeah, you get, I'm going to hunt you down and kill you. But it wasn't the last time. I did a cartoon of Prime Minister Netanyahu, and I think it was Brownlee, and I had them from behind walking towards this war-ravaged landscape, and I said that the character, Brownlee, was saying, I just want to assure you, Prime Minister Netanyahu, that I consider Minister McCulley to have been premature in sponsoring the UN resolution on Israel's settlement in Palestinian territory. He is no longer the New Zealand's Minister of Foreign Affairs. And I had Netanyahu saying, good, did you have him killed? And he says, yes, Minister McCulley is dead, or he will be dead later this afternoon. And I didn't think that was too bad. But I didn't anticipate at all the reaction to it. And I was accused of being anti-Semitic, and there was a lot of hate messages around that. And I remember it was the week before I was going to be inducted into the Massey Hall of Fame, and the people, I think that Israel has, it sounds paranoid, but I know it to be true. They have groups of people who are monitoring, sort of understandably, but monitoring for anything that happens in the media, and then they hit it really hard. And so this had gone on for days of this quite punishing thing, and then in these days before this induction, they got into my Wikipedia page and said that I was a well-known anti-Semitic cartoonist.
Wow.
And
so that's organised, right?
Yeah. And so the editors of New Zealand Wikipedia put an alert on the account, so that at any time it was changed. But of course, anyone who was looking me up in the days before that induction, because it was the first line in the entry, well-known anti-Semitic cartoonist. And I found that quite hard to deal with.
I mean,
I should say that I have come to the conclusion now that cartooning about Israel and Palestine is, I don't think that a cartoon can do it justice. It is a fairly blunt instrument, and so I think it's probably better done in writing.
Sure. Because what is the role of a cartoon or a cartoonist? Is it to entertain? Is it to be provocative? Is it to educate? What do you see as being the job of a cartoonist?
I quite often think of it as to be a witness, that to say, especially I have seen what's happened to you, it's and I think that is quite powerful. Like last week, I did a cartoon, and it was about the Race Relations Commissioner and the trouble we got in with giving...
The koha,
Yeah.
the manga mob, yep.
And there seemed to be this general misunderstanding that people thought that he was paying them money, when in fact he was following tikanga, you know, that this was really what he should have done, that or food or, you know, whatever. But he wrote to me in the days after that and said how punishing it had been, and that it had been a great solace to him to see this cartoon, you know.
Because what kind of feedback do you get from politicians? Did they ring you up and say, my hair doesn't look like that? Yeah, because secretly they quite, you know, often when you go into politicians' offices, they have cartoons that, you know, are ostensibly quite derogatory on their walls. So they secretly quite like the fact that they get cartooned. I mean, do you get any feedback from politicians?
Not a lot. I think that Judith Collins has gone on TV and she was asked about cartoons and she said she didn't like, you know, mine, and I can't remember who the other person was. She liked Jeff Bell's drawing.
Okay. Well, that's probably a badge of honour, though, isn't it, as a cartoonist, that the politicians don't like your representation?
No.
Oh, actually, just while you're at the roughs. Yeah, so just talk a little bit about your process. So these are obviously presumably still hand-drawn. So do you...
Really rough.
So how does it work? So you start with a kind of hand-drawn sketch?
Well, I have a sketchbook. I have this one kind of sketchbook that I am attached to, and when Japan City was closing down, I went and bought every one. I have enough to see me out. And I think when I finish my last one, I'll quit. But I draw these very roughly, and I think it keeps a liveliness to them, you know, the drawings. I haven't actually drawn this, I think. Yeah, that was Peter Goodfellow dead on a slab, and Judith saying he's coming around now. But I've never drawn that up. So yeah, and then they get really rough, and I haven't drawn that one up either.
So for every cartoon, how many rejected roughs might there be?
Oh,
I mean that you reject, obviously, that you...
Quite a few.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then what happens?
And then I do it another level up, so I draw it up to... I haven't drawn this one either. I think that was when Claire Curran, you know, the National Party, had a trophy that had... and it was toilet seat, and they had a photo of it round Claire Curran's neck.
Okay.
And so then I do it in the frame that it is going, and these days I then work over it in on an iPad.
Oh, okay. And so then it gets... do you manually colour it before you make it digital or not?
Sometimes I use a dip pen. I am either really old-fashioned and have the dip pen, or I do the iPad.
Conscious that we're running out of time, and I do just briefly want to touch on cats and dogs, because it's not all power in politics. Sharon does also obviously do Monroe, and did some beautiful illustrations for Mike's book of cats and dogs. I mean, is it the same process? How do you capture an animal in cartoon? They're a bit further. Yeah, there we go.
Yes, that's our cat and dog. they don't actually dance like that. In fact, Iris rushes at Munro, and Munro sort of backs up, but he doesn't move. He's quite a characterful cat, though. So I put words in his mouth, and same with that's her.
That's Iris.
She's irascible, though.
No, so Iris is a sore point, right? So Mike, who is my partner,
I'm
Sharon
sorry.
drew beautiful illustrations for this book, which is about my dog. And somehow Sharon's dog ended up on the cover, and she tries to tell me that it's because Cooper was, too handsome to cartoon.
He is
a little bit dubious of the theory.
No, well, he was big, and he is very handsome. And I didn't feel like I could take the piss out of him like I could out of Iris.
So what makes a good kind of cat or dog to cartoon then? Something with a bit of...
quite a lot of expression.
Yeah.
I do have... I also do mice. And I think there was there was the one after that where Iris is doing up the buttons on her coat and talking about them being a bit of a fiddle when she was trying to chase the tractor.
Now, I'm conscious that I do want to leave time for questions, but I just had one more question. I mean, if you were to do a cartoon of your past year, what would that look like?
Oh my God. I don't think it would be a cartoon.
Right.
I think it would be a scribble.
Brilliant. Now look, I'm sure that you have questions, so please, if you want to ask something of Sharon, put your hand up and we'll... Mike?
Sharon, you obviously press the buttons of the public and you see some of the reaction. What attitude have you got with the editors? Do the editors ever say to you, Sharon, you've gone too far this time and we're not going to run that cartoon?
Yes. Not very often, but I do remember when I first started and I had done a caricature of someone, and Bernadette Courtney, who was the editor at the time, she was looking at it and she said, his nose looks awfully like a penis, and she didn't feel comfortable with running it on it. And it wasn't on purpose that, And then she took it out into the newsroom and she said, can anyone tell me, I haven't seen a penis in quite some time, but does this look like a penis to anyone? And the consensus was that it did, but they thought it was probably, noses are fairly phallic.
So what happened? Did you just completely redraw it, or did the nose get smaller, or what happened?
I probably took a little groove off the end of it or something.
Any other questions? Yes? Lee?
You said that cartooning was quite a boys' club. What about the tone of a cartoon, or I guess your cartoons could be considered feminine, and what were they afraid of?
I don't know. There's a Scottish cartoonist called, I think her name is Sandy McCall, and she describes those cartoonists as big nose cartoonists, like.
Brilliant juxtaposition of ideas.
But big nose cartooning, there was a period when I have come to the conclusion about cartooning that you can actually, when I started, there was kind of rules about how you were supposed to do it, you know. Like Rod Emerson says, there's a certain proportion of body is head and, you know, and body, which is a lot shorter than real proportions. But now I think you can do it any way you want. I mean,
do you think you do bring up a different perspective as a woman? Or
oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and I certainly cartoon on the subjects I choose are different, you know. I do some of you know, like I obviously cartoon on many mainstream things, but I do cartoon on those issues that interest me quite.
So it's more a question of subject choice than style necessarily. Yeah. Anyone else have questions for Sharon? No other questions? I mean, going back to the politicians, presumably they have to come through you if they want to get copies, do they? So
or they can go.
Who's got one on their wall?
I tell you, this is quite often surprising. I did a cartoon of a judge who was giving women who were appearing in his court, in the family court, and he was kind of bullying them, you know, and there had been a couple of stories in the paper about it. And so I did a cartoon of him, which I don't so often do, you know, like someone. But he was high profile enough, and his era was egregious enough that he deserved a cartoon. And I had him leaning over the bench with his mallet, waving it at someone and saying, "Don't make me come down there," and, you know, and it ran in the paper, and then he rang up and wanted a copy of it, and he was very pleased with it and said that his colleagues had told him that it looked just like him.
Wow, so that's fascinating. Isn't it? Completely missing the point.
Yeah,
right. Okay, but it was just happy to be considered kind of important enough to have made it into a Murdoch cartoon.
And I did the bloke who was the head of the Property Investors Association or something, and I had him as a raging bull, and he looked quite demented, and his wife rang up and said that she wanted to get a copy of it for his birthday.
Maybe it was a parting gift. I did want to ask, you know, well, perhaps you don't have a political bent, but presumably, you know, you're more sort of socially or politically left. Is it more difficult to be a political cartoonist when your team is in power?
Oh, yes. I love the National Party. They are such characters, you know, like they are bigger characters, and I don't know if it's just I see them that way, but they're great to cartoon, and I felt for that reason very sad.
Who was your favourite to cartoon?
Well,
because John Key's quite difficult, isn't he? Because he's not that. He's a little bit nondescript, no?
Tom Scott described him as looking like a knife pushed through a scrotum. But I don't think his nose was that big.
No.
But it was the only distinctive thing about him. Although he did have his hair was quite well back on his head, and it did give him a look of Julius Caesar.
So who is your favourite to draw, or was?
I like Jerry Brownlee. just because his personality was loud, you know, and obviously, like Judith Collins, like she's kind of a gift.
And Winston seems to turn up quite a bit.
Yeah, but that's more because of what he does.
Right, than because of... So who's the most...
I actually like Shane Jones.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So who's the most difficult to draw?
Well, Key was difficult. Ardern is very easy because she has big features and yeah.
Probably got time for one last question if anyone has a question. Sorry, yes, yeah.
Just thinking about the other people who commentate, I suppose like Tom Sainsbury, some of those other people. I mean, in terms of your kind of sense of colleagueship, how does that do?
It tends to be amongst cartoonists. So we have a group of we have a chat, a group chat that I don't think the editors know about, but
right, because you're all from competing organisations.
Yeah, we are from competing organisations, but we have, there's bits of news goes flying around, and I like Jonathan King, who is here. You do feel I can't think of the word. There's a connection to other people who draw, and particularly draw cartoons.
Fabulous. Look, thank you so much for that, Sharon. It's been an absolutely fabulous session. You can all go out and buy How to Walk a Dog with Sharon's dog on the front. But yes, thank you so much for coming here, and we've been so fortunate to have you, and good luck with your ongoing recovery.
Yeah.
And so please.
That was Sharon Murdoch speaking to Nikki MacDonald at the 2021 Marlborough Book Festival. A big thanks to all the writers that have supported the festival, as well as the audiences that attended in person or listened online. If you'd like to learn more, head over to marlboroughbookfest.co.nz. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, please like and subscribe and tell a friend. Thanks for listening.